And we're back. So we have two ousters today, this time from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He has asked Army Chief of Staff General Randy George to leave his post. George is the Army's most senior general. A defense official says Hegseth asked General George to retire immediately. Now, the ouster comes as the U.S., of course, is battling Iran. Joining me now is Hal Kempfert, a familiar face around here, and on Live Now, a national security analyst, also a retired U.S. Marine. Thank you, and thank you for your service. Let's just get your reaction to this. Is this really a big deal?
Well, Marla, it's a deal. I mean, normally when you become a service chief or a chairman of the Joint Chiefs or the vice chair, normally those are 4-year terms. That is not set in stone. That can change, and certainly we've seen a lot of changes. You know, with Pete Hegseth as Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense, he's removed about a dozen flag and general officers. Of course, you may recall he removed C.Q. Brown, Air Force General, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs when he came in. He also, Lisa Franchetti, who was the CNO Admiral, head of the Navy, Chief of Naval Operations. And then, of course, General Cruz, Lieutenant General Cruz, head of DIA, and others have been removed as well. So they're not afraid of removing flag and general officers, but this is still a big deal, but not unexpected because it's who we replace him with that I'm really looking.
Okay. Who did he replace him with?
Well, he replaced him with Christopher Neve, and that's kind of an interesting thing. Randy George was the senior military aide or advisor to basically, I was going to say Hegseth's predecessor in the Biden administration. Neve was the senior military advisor for Hegseth, the Secretary of War. So there is a certain continuity, if you will, that the senior advisor gets moved into being, moved up into being the head of the Army. And you got to remember that Hegseth was a former Army officer. He'd served for many years. He'd served over in a variety of assignments around the world, combat in Iraq. So he knew the Army. He understands the Army. He's probably a little partial to the Army. I've been known to be a little biased towards the Marine Corps at times, shocking but true. And so he does know the Army, and I think that was something he felt strong about. And Christopher Neve, certainly Randy George had a very impressive record, combat commands, all sorts of stuff. But Christopher Neve was with the commander of 82nd Airborne between 1922, 23. Certainly very accomplished. And one thing, when you're the Secretary of Defense, you want to have, service chiefs and the chairman and others who you can really rely upon, who you can really kind of understand their judgment, their thinking. And that's something he has with Neve. Not something I don't know that that's something he necessarily had with Randy George, because he inherited General George from the previous administration.
Which makes sense as to then why it wouldn't necessarily be a big surprise, because he wants to put somebody in there that he can own, essentially, like, this is my guy, right? So Hegseth has done more than a dozen firings of top generals. Is that a lot? And then also, let's talk about the fact that this isn't just any given Thursday. I mean, we heard from the president last night where today marks day 33 of the war in Iran. The fact that we're doing this in the midst of a war, and what does that mean? That can't be good, or does it not necessarily matter as much as we might think?
Well, it's not going to change up a lot of things with the war itself. He's not an operational commander. He's a 4-star general. He's the chief of staff for the Army, but he's in charge of a service. He's not in charge of something like U.S. Central Command. So it's a little bit different. Certainly, you don't like to see a lot of turmoil at the top ranks during times of war, but on the other hand, these things do happen. And certainly, if you go back to our history of war, World War II, World War I. The Civil War is kind of famous because Lincoln was firing generals left and right until he found a general he could really count on, who was Ulysses S. Grant. So, so it does happen in time of war. So it's not a shock. And also, I will say this: I would assume, being a former Army officer, that he's a little bit more focused on the Army. And I think the Army is a great service. They do a wonderful job, as we like to say in the Marine Corps. It's always nice to know they're behind us. But Sorry, my inner voice came out on that one. But
we appreciate your inner voice in that.
okay.
You know,
Anyway,
you're just being you, Hal. Very good.
I'm just being me. I can't help it. Yeah. Anyway, but with that, he would be a little more inclined to focus on the Army Chief of Staff and the Army as a whole, simply because of his background. And he's he inherited an Army Chief of Staff for over a year while he was there, and certainly there's a pattern we've seen where they like to get their own choices in these top jobs. And Dan Kane was rather surprising. I mean, they chose Dan Kane as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Dan Kane had been actually retired for a year, and they had to bring him back on active duty and make him a 4-star general. So this is not unusual, and so I don't read too much into it, and I don't think it's going to be that disruptive.
Well, let me ask you this: that apparently he's had would you agree with this? Impressive rise, a quick rise for an officer who was only a 2-star general just 2 years ago.
He's moved fast. I will tell you that is not something that I've seen that is that shocking either. I can remember a Marine commandant that I served with when he was a brigadier general during Desert Storm, and I just shake my head how fast it was that he, next thing you know, he pinned on 2 stars. He got back, pinned on 2 stars, then he pinned on 3 stars. I don't even know if he served a full year as a 3-star general before he got his 4th star.
Is this sort of a thing of being in the right place at the right time? I don't want to say nepotism because this isn't a familial thing, but you get what I'm asking.
It's not so much nepotism, but look, when you get into the flag and general officer ranks, there are politics. Mm-hmm. All right, service politics, and there's just, and anyone in the military will tell you there are politics at the top levels. And so when you're a general officer or flag officer, your movement up can be a variety of different things. You know, I served very closely with an officer who became a 3-star general, and only found out years later. I was kind of scratching my head because it was amazing how he moved up. And I mean, he's a good guy, very qualified and everything else, but it turns out that there was a 4-star Marine general that just had his eye on him, and those things happen. And you know, you find it with service bias. You'll sometimes find it outside of service bias. I remember we had a commandant of the Marine Corps who was not a likely choice to become commandant, and there was a meeting with senior officers and the Secretary of Navy, and they explained why this was the commandant you wanted. And next thing you know, Secretary of Navy turned around and said, "That's who I want," and it surprised everybody. So there are politics, there are preferences. There's a lot of different reasons why.
Like in every other industry and sector. Final question then, with all of that said, does he have, in your opinion, is he qualified for this post then? You feel comfortable with him?
As far as I can tell, he's fully qualified. And I think part of it is he's going to bring in a fresh perspective. The other thing is, I think he'll be very effective working with the Secretary of War because, well, he knows him quite well. He's worked with him for the last year or so. There'll be a certain rapport there that they have that will probably be very positive in terms of policy. Now, people will disagree with the policies, but I will tell you that at least they know each other, they understand each other, they know how each other thinks. And at the 4-star rank with the cabinet, you know, with the secretary, that is so important, is to have that level of communication, understanding, trust, confidence, if you will, in your service chiefs, and certainly, you know, the chairman and the vice chair. So I think that'll be a very positive thing.
All right. Well, we appreciate you, Hal, as always. He is Hal Kempfert, National Security Analyst and Marine, former Marine, always a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Retired Marine. Sorry, I hate when I say former. So retired Marine. Hal, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Marla.